The first strange thing I noticed that night was my boss laughing a real laugh. It wasn't the polite smile she wore for clients, or the carefully measured expression she used in difficult meetings. This was effortless. Her head tilted back slightly, one hand covering her mouth, and her usually cool eyes reflected the warm golden lights of the hotel bar. For a brief moment, Vivien Hayes looked like someone who had forgotten the pressure of being the strongest person in every room. That should have been my first warning. For 14 months, Vivien had been my direct supervisor at one of Chicago's most respected boutique branding agencies. I was a senior copywriter, and she was our creative director, the woman who could rescue failing presentations, silence, demanding clients with a few calm sentences, and somehow remember every employee's coffee order despite running million-dollar campaigns. She intimidated almost everyone, not because she was cruel, but because she seemed impossible to shake. Yet behind that flawless professionalism was a genuinely kind person. She stayed late helping junior designers, quietly sent meals to coworkers dealing with family emergencies, and when my father underwent emergency heart surgery, she approved my leave within seconds before sending flowers to the hospital on behalf of the company. She never mentioned it again. That quiet kindness was exactly why I admired her far more than I should have. I never crossed any professional boundaries. Having feelings for your boss was dangerous enough without acting on them, so I buried those emotions where they belonged and convinced myself they would stay there forever. That night was supposed to be another harmless company celebration. After 6 exhausting weeks of revisions, sleepless nights, and impossible client demands, our team had finally landed a major luxury hotel branding contract. We celebrated in the hotel's cocktail lounge after dinner. By 10:30, half the team had gone home. By 11, only 4 of us remained. By 11:40, everyone else had left, except Vivien and me. I should have left too, but instead, she lifted her martini, smiled across the table, and teased, "You can leave if you want, Owen. I promise I won't deduct attendance points." I laughed. "I'd never forgive myself for abandoning my creative director," she smiled. "See, work has successfully conditioned you." For the next 20 minutes, we talked without mentioning deadlines, clients, or presentations. It felt strangely refreshing seeing the woman behind the polished executive image. She quietly slipped off her high heels beneath the table and sighed. "Do you know what I hate most about big victories?" she asked. "What?" "Everyone expects you to celebrate them," I nodded. "The truth is, after projects like this, I usually just want to sleep." She smiled in agreement. I looked at her and joked, "Careful, you're starting to sound like a normal person." She laughed again. "If people at the office discovered that, my authority would disappear overnight." Just then, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and something changed instantly. Most people wouldn't have noticed, but after working beside her for over a year, I recognized the smallest shifts in her expression. The warmth disappeared, her shoulders stiffened, and she quietly turned the phone face down. "You okay?" I asked. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine." She studied me for a moment before asking, "Is this genuine concern? Or are you simply applying crisis management skills from the branding industry?" I smiled. "Probably both." She stayed silent for several seconds before finally admitting in a quiet voice, "My ex-fiancé just got engaged." The words lingered between us. "I'm sorry," I said. She shrugged lightly. "We broke up almost 2 years ago. I just didn't expect to find out through social media." I couldn't help smiling. She noticed immediately. "What?" "Nothing. It's just, that's probably the most relatable thing you've ever said." She laughed softly, and the bartender, wisely ignoring her request for another martini, placed a glass of water in front of her instead. She accepted it without complaint. Around midnight, the music stopped as the staff prepared to close. I stood up and said, "Come on, I'll make sure you get home safely." Vivien stood confidently, and nearly lost her balance on her very first step. She grabbed my arm before falling, and sighed. "Perhaps I'm not as graceful as I imagined." Outside, Chicago greeted us with freezing winter wind. Every taxi was occupied, and rideshare prices had quadrupled because a nearby concert had just ended. Vivien leaned against a stone column outside the hotel, still carrying her expensive heels in one hand. "Should I call your sister?" I asked. She opened one eye. "My sister has 3 children under 6. So, no? If I wake her because I drank too much?" Vivien replied, "She'll probably leave me here as a life lesson." I laughed. "Fair enough. Then let's get you home." She immediately shook her head. "My doorman already knows far too much about my life. I'd rather not give him another story." I looked at her carefully. The elegant woman, who always seemed completely composed, now looked like someone who simply wanted the world to stop asking things of her for one night. My apartment was only a 6-minute walk away, while hers was nearly half an hour across downtown traffic. After thinking for a moment, I carefully said, "My place is just around the corner. You can sleep on my couch, drink some water, and leave first thing tomorrow morning before anyone knows." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she searched my face with surprising seriousness before quietly asking, "Are you someone I can trust enough to let my guard down around?" The question caught me completely off guard, but I didn't hesitate. "Yes." She continued studying me for another few seconds before finally nodding. Okay, that was how I found myself walking home after midnight with my boss leaning lightly against my shoulder, carrying her designer heels in one hand while I silently realized that nothing about this night would ever be ordinary again. I unlocked my apartment a few minutes later, suddenly seeing it through Vivien's eyes for the first time. Compared to the elegant spaces she was used to, my place was painfully ordinary. A worn blue couch sat beneath a crooked landscape, painting I had never gotten around to straightening. Books were stacked on the coffee table, several healthy houseplants lined the windowsill, and a standing lamp filled the room with warm yellow light. It wasn't messy, but it clearly belonged to a man who cared more about ideas than interior decorating. Vivien stepped inside barefoot, slowly looking around before smiling. "You have plants?" she asked with genuine surprise. "I'm just as shocked they're still alive," I admitted. She laughed softly. "You sound very proud of yourself." "I am." For the first time that evening, she looked completely relaxed. She removed her blazer, folded it neatly over a chair, and accepted the glass of warm water I handed her. Then another. She finished both without complaint while leaning against the kitchen counter. "Feeling better?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "Better than 10 minutes ago. Not perfect. That's honest." "Alcohol encourages honesty," she replied with a faint smile. I spread a blanket across the couch. "You can sleep here. I'll take the chair." She looked at the narrow sofa, then at me. "That doesn't seem comfortable. Neither is sleeping on the floor, but I'll survive." She smiled. "You're surprisingly prepared for unexpected situations. Working under you taught me that." That earned another laugh. I found the cleanest gray t-shirt I owned and offered it to her. "If you'd like something more comfortable." She accepted it, our fingers brushing for just a second. "Thank you, Owen." While she changed in the bathroom, I placed a bottle of water beside the couch, dimmed the lights, and reminded myself over and over that this was simply an act of kindness. Nothing more. Then she came back wearing my oversized t-shirt. Her hair was down for the first time since I'd met her, falling naturally over her shoulders. Without the tailored suit, the makeup touched by exhaustion, and the perfectly controlled posture, she looked completely different, less like the intimidating creative director everyone admired, and more like an ordinary woman who had simply reached the end of a very difficult day. I realized I had been staring. She caught me immediately. "What?" I cleared my throat. "I was just wondering why my old college t-shirt suddenly looks expensive." The corner of her mouth lifted. "That's an excellent recovery." She settled onto the couch, leaned back, and closed her eyes. For several quiet minutes, neither of us spoke. I thought she had fallen asleep until her voice broke the silence. "Would you sit with me for a minute?" My heart immediately began racing. I chose the armchair beside the couch. She opened one eye. "That wasn't what I meant." I glanced at the tiny empty space beside her. "This sofa doesn't exactly encourage good decisions." She smiled mischievously and shifted over slightly. "There's enough room." I carefully sat on the very edge, keeping as much distance as possible. She looked at me before laughing. "You're sitting like someone from Human Resources is watching us." "In my mind," I replied, "they absolutely are." She shook her head. "Least romantic sentence I've ever heard." I looked at her calmly. "I'm not trying to be romantic." The words settled heavily between us. She studied my face before quietly saying, "I know." After another long silence, she sighed. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "I'm in your apartment wearing your shirt because my ex got engaged, and somehow I've handled the whole situation like an emotional disaster." I smiled gently. "You're being too hard on yourself." She looked away. "Maybe." I leaned forward slightly. "You've spent weeks under enormous pressure. Tonight you got blindsided by painful news. You're exhausted, embarrassed, and disappointed. You're allowed one night where you don't have to be perfect." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Vulnerable. "You always do that," she whispered. "Do what?" "You make difficult things feel smaller." I smiled. "Maybe because they aren't as impossible as they seem." Her eyes remained fixed on mine. You're a dangerous man, Owen. Dangerous? Kind men are always dangerous. I laughed quietly. Life isn't very fair. A few minutes later, her breathing slowed. She wasn't asleep yet, only drifting toward it. Without opening her eyes, she whispered, "Would you stay here until I fall asleep?" The question reminded me of what she'd asked outside the hotel, whether she could trust me. "Of course," I answered softly. I stayed exactly where I was. Sometime during the night, exhaustion finally caught both of us. I never remembered moving. I only remembered the sound of rain tapping against the windows and the comforting warmth of the quiet apartment before sleep finally claimed me too. When I opened my eyes the next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the curtains. For a few confused seconds, I couldn't understand why I felt so warm. Then I looked down. Vivien was asleep with her head resting against my chest, one arm loosely wrapped around my side beneath the blanket. At some point during the night, we'd both shifted together on the narrow couch without either of us realizing it. I froze, afraid to wake her. A few seconds later, she stirred. Her body became perfectly still as awareness slowly returned. She realized exactly where she was. Slowly, she lifted her head and looked into my eyes. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by genuine embarrassment. She whispered. I smiled carefully. Good morning. She sat up slowly, rubbing one temple. I think I owe you another apology. For using me as a pillow? I asked. She blinked before laughing despite herself. Exactly. Honestly, I replied, I think we both accidentally fell asleep. She shook her head, smiling in disbelief. You have an incredible talent for making awkward situations feel normal. I'm just trying not to make them worse. Her expression softened. I haven't slept that peacefully beside another person in a very long time. Those words carried far more weight than any joke we'd shared the night before. I answered quietly. You were exhausted. She looked at me for several seconds before speaking again. That wasn't the only reason. Neither of us said another word. We didn't need to. Something unspoken had quietly existed between us for months, and now, sitting together on that little blue couch in the morning light, neither of us could pretend it wasn't there anymore. The silence between us was interrupted by the vibration of Vivien's phone on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen and sighed. Of course, she muttered. The client wants an emergency conference call in 40 minutes. They've decided to change the entire launch schedule overnight. I checked the time. That's a rough way to start a Wednesday. She gave me a tired look. It's Thursday. I blinked. That's somehow even worse. She laughed, and hearing that laugh again felt like the room had suddenly become lighter. It reminded me that despite everything that had happened during the night, she was still the same brilliant, composed woman I admired, only now I had seen the side of her that almost no one else ever did. She stood slowly and glanced down at my oversized t-shirt. I should probably leave before your neighbors start inventing stories. At least wash up first, I said. You have a meeting, remember? She hesitated before nodding. While she disappeared into the bathroom, I brewed fresh coffee and searched my closet for the cleanest white dress shirt I owned. A few minutes later, she returned with damp hair, looking refreshed but still wearing my t-shirt. She looked somehow even more beautiful, without the polished armor she usually wore to work. I handed her the coffee and the shirt. This should fit well enough under your blazer. She accepted both with a grateful smile. I canned. You keep making this morning easier than it should be. Occupational hazard? I replied. Creative problem solving. She studied me carefully before speaking in a quieter voice. No, Owen, that's not what worries me. Then what does? You're making it very difficult for me not to depend on your kindness. I didn't answer immediately because I understood exactly what she meant. A few minutes later, she stepped back into the living room, fully dressed again. The elegant blazer was back. Her hair was neatly tied up once more. Within minutes, the powerful creative director had returned. Yet, something had changed. Before putting on her heels, she turned toward me. I don't want last night to become something we both pretend never happened. Her words surprised me, because they echoed my own thoughts. I nodded immediately. Neither do I. She seemed relieved. Good. I walked her to the front door. She slipped into her heels and looked almost identical to the woman who had entered the office every morning for the past year. Almost. Because just before opening the door, she stopped and faced me again. I need to ask you something. Anything. She held my gaze without hesitation. If I made a very reckless decision right now, would you tell me it was just because I drank too much last night? Time seemed to stop. I thought carefully before answering. No, she waited. I would never say that. Something softened in her expression. She stepped closer until only a few inches separated us. Morning sunlight illuminated her face as she whispered, "Good, because if I decide to kiss you right now, I want you to know it won't be because of the tequila." Every instinct in me wanted to close the distance immediately, but I forced myself to think instead of react. She deserved honesty, not impulse. I smiled gently. "If you kiss me, I'll absolutely kiss you back," she smiled. But I need to know we're not confusing last night's emotions with today's clarity." She looked at me for a long moment, before quietly saying, "That's exactly why I trust you." My heartbeat grew louder with every second. "I've asked myself many times," she continued, "whether you were simply kind, or whether what existed between us was something real. I know the answer now." She took another small step forward. "Do you?" I didn't hesitate anymore. "Yes." I met her eyes. "I've cared about you for much longer than I should have. I've just never wanted to put you in an impossible position." She listened without interrupting. "You're my boss," I continued. "People would question your judgment. They'd question your career. I never wanted our feelings to become something either of us regretted." A warm smile slowly appeared on her face. "You really think about everyone, except yourself, don't you?" "I'm trying to think about us." Her eyes shimmered. "That's exactly why I—" She stopped herself, took a slow breath, and reached up to gently rest one hand against my cheek. Her touch was warm, steady, and completely certain. "Then let me answer your question," she whispered. "I'm completely sober." She rose onto her toes and kissed me. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It wasn't fueled by alcohol or loneliness. It was gentle, patient, and filled with months of unspoken feelings, finally finding their way into the open. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us spoke for several seconds. She rested her forehead lightly against mine before laughing softly. "Well," she said, "that's one way to complicate Thursday morning." I smiled. "Actually, I think we just made it much simpler." She laughed again, then became serious. "We still have to deal with reality." I nodded. "The office." "Exactly. Neither of us wanted our relationship to become a secret built on dishonesty." We talked quietly for several minutes, agreeing that whatever happened between us had to be handled responsibly. Then Vivien revealed something I hadn't expected. "There's an internal leadership transfer opening next month," she said. "Different department, different reporting structure." I looked at her in surprise. "You were already considering it?" She nodded. "Long before last night." Then she smiled. "This morning simply gave me one more reason to stop pretending I wasn't ready." Relief washed over me. It wasn't an impulsive decision made because of one emotional night. It was something she'd already planned. We simply looked at each other and smiled. "Then let's do this properly," I said. She nodded without hesitation. "Properly. No secrets. No pretending. And one real first date," she laughed. "Without client dinners. Without emergency meetings. And, preferably," she added, "without me falling asleep on your chest." I grinned. "That seems like a reasonable goal." She looked at me with the brightest smile I'd ever seen. "Dinner tomorrow?" "Tomorrow? Why wait?" she asked playfully. "We've already wasted enough time pretending." I couldn't argue with that. "Tomorrow it is." She reached for the doorknob, then stopped one last time, turning back toward me with a smile warmer than any I had ever seen. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for letting me stay here. Thank you for making me feel safe." Those words meant more than I could ever explain. I stepped closer and answered honestly, "You never have to pretend to be strong around me, Vivien. Whenever life becomes too much, whenever you need somewhere to breathe, my door will always be open for you." Her eyes softened with emotion. Without another word, she leaned in, gave me one final gentle kiss, and quietly disappeared into the crisp Chicago morning. The following evening became our first real date. There were no clients waiting for us, no presentations to prepare, no deadlines hanging over our heads. We chose a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of Lincoln Park, far from the noise of downtown. Vivien wore a simple black dress instead of her usual tailored business suits, and for the first time, I realized how different she looked when she wasn't carrying the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. We talked for hours, not about campaigns or branding strategies, but about ourselves. We laughed over impossible clients, shared stories from our childhoods, confessed the moments when we had secretly admired one another, and eventually admitted that whatever existed between us hadn't begun that morning or even the night before. It had been quietly growing for months, while both of us stubbornly pretended not to notice. That evening, there were no titles separating us. She wasn't my creative director, and I wasn't her employee. We were simply Vivien and Owen, two people finally allowing themselves to be honest. 2 weeks later, Vivien officially submitted the internal transfer request she had already been considering long before that unforgettable night. A month afterward, the company's leadership approved the move, placing her in a completely different division with an entirely separate reporting structure. The professional barrier that had worried both of us from the beginning disappeared, allowing us to build our relationship without secrecy, guilt, or compromise. Looking back now, I think that was the reason everything worked so well. We didn't ignore reality because we were in love. Instead, we respected it. We chose patience over impulse, honesty over convenience, and trust over temporary excitement. Our feelings had existed long before we confessed them, but what truly mattered was giving those feelings the right foundation, instead of rushing into something that could have damaged both our careers and the future we hope to share. Vivien is still one of the most brilliant people I have ever known. She remains calm in every boardroom, still solves impossible problems before anyone else even realizes they exist, and still commands every meeting with the same quiet confidence that first impressed me. But now I also know another side of her, the woman very few people ever get to see. She's the woman who occasionally appears at my apartment after a long day, carrying takeout instead of expensive handbags, kicks off her heels the moment she steps inside, steals one of my oversized t-shirts, curls up beside me on that same old blue couch, and falls asleep peacefully against my chest, without worrying about appearances or expectations. Looking back, I realized that night didn't change our lives because we shared our first kiss. It changed everything because trust came before romance. Long before either of us admitted how we felt, we had already proven something far more important: we could protect one another when it mattered most. The kiss simply confirmed what our actions had already been saying all along. People often believe love begins with dramatic confessions or unforgettable first dates, but ours didn't. It began the moment Vivien stood outside that luxury hotel, looked into my eyes, and quietly asked whether I was someone she could trust enough to let her guard down around. Everything that followed grew naturally from the answer I gave her that night. Every time she falls asleep beside me now with complete peace on her face, I'm reminded that choosing to protect her heart before trying to win it was the best decision I have ever made. If there's one lesson I've learned from this experience, it's that the strongest relationships are never built on grand romantic gestures alone. They're built on patience, respect, honesty, and the quiet decision to put someone else's well-being ahead of your own desires. Looking back, I wouldn't change a single moment of that unforgettable night. Not the awkward silence, not the uncertainty, not even the fear of crossing a line. Without all of those moments, we never would have discovered the life waiting for us on the other side. So now I'm curious about you. If you had found yourself in my position, what would you have done? Would you have taken the risk, or would you have walked away to protect the professional boundaries between you? And have you ever experienced one unexpected night that completely changed the way you saw someone forever? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you again in the next one.